All right. Genesis chapter 2, as you can see. Genesis chapter 2, the framework. That's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Is the framework. The framework of marriage. Uh, every house is obviously has got a slab, and that's what we're going back to. Matthew chapter 7. Jesus was saying, build your house on a rock. And as we would very carefully build the house that we live in, we need to very carefully build our houses, spiritually speaking, that the Lord's given us. Okay, we need to build our marriages. We need to build our families. We need to raise our children. All of that based upon the scriptures. So building our house on a rock. Okay, so obviously when you build a house, you put in the slab, and we talked about that. It's the rock that we build on, the fundamentals. It's the foundation. That's the starting point. Last time we talked about the plate. That's the kind of the beginning of the framework, but it holds the framework to the slab, to the rock, and ties everything together. And the framework is the skeleton. We're going to kind of get into that for a bit tonight, as we typically do. To begin with, a little bit of a disclaimer, okay? I talked about these as we go through these lessons. They're going to be offensive, and because what I'm teaching, I'm just teaching what the Bible says about marriage. The world has a lot to say about marriage, and so as we can tell in the society that we live in, the world has a lot to say about marriage. So when you start taking marriage and wrapping it up and saying that only God gets to define what marriage is, then you're bound to start offending people very quickly. And that's okay, because the truth itself is offensive. I'm not intentionally being offensive as the teacher, the pastor. I'm not trying to. That's not my goal, is to offend people. My goal is to help people see the truth. But by nature, the truth is offensive when people choose to disagree with it. Now, I said all of that to say this. The lessons that I'm teaching, a lot of them are going to be offensive to the world. The lesson that I'm about to teach tonight is going to be offensive to the church. Okay? So there's bound to be somebody who gets offended, probably in the room tonight. It's not my goal to offend you. I want you to understand that. It's not my goal to offend you. If you're watching on YouTube, it's not my goal to offend you. It's my goal to help you. And what I'm trying to do biblically is teach the standard that God has set for marriage. You're going to hear me say this again. I'm trying to teach the standard that God has set for marriage. What I'm doing in my personal life is I'm trying to take my family and live as close as we can to that standard. No marriage is going to live up to the complete standard, because just like everything else, as we flow spiritually, the standard is the standard of perfection, and we're trying to move to that standard of perfection, and we're trying to get as close as we can to it. And so no family gets there, and my family's trying, but I want you to know I'm not saying this as a person tonight that says I've got this figured out and I know how it's going to work, and we know all these things and every bit of it's applied perfectly in my marriage. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying this is what we're striving for, because this is the biblical aspect, okay? This is what the Bible has to say about it. My intent's not to offend, but to help with the scripture, to present the standard to you so that you can adjust your marriage to that standard, so that you can receive the blessings of God from doing things His way. By the way, congratulations. You came to church tonight, right? So you get it, right? Okay. It's the truth, right? All right. So the frame. Let's get started. The frame. Skeleton. What does it do? What does the frame do? It is the skeleton of the house. It gives shape to the house. It kind of defines what rooms are, that kind of thing. Adds strength to the house. The strength of the framework is really the strength of the entire house. The slab holds it up. Obviously, the framework gives it strength. It is the bones It is the bones of the relationship. So all of this is true about what we're about to talk about. This is the bones of the relationship. And what this is the rule of rank. This is the framework. This is the bones of your marriage. The rule of rank. This rule states that for proper biblical function in a marriage, your relationship with your spouse is to be prioritized over your relationship with any other person. Right? Okay? So, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to lay this out biblically. I think it's pretty easy to see, but as I lay it out biblically, you'll see that, and then I'm going to get into some implications. What is that? What does that then mean for us? How do we cause that? How do we help that? How do we adjust the way we're living to allow that to take place in our marriages and also the marriages that are around us? Okay, this is not despite God. In other words, the prioritizing is not a prioritization of another person over God. That's not what's being said, but it's a prioritization of your spouse, not above God, but because of God. Does that make sense? Okay? It's not despite God, it's because of God. You're not putting them ahead of God, but because God is the only that you're serving, and you're building everything around the standard that God set, and that He's your head and He's the guiding force in your life, then this is what you're to do in your relationships, your worldly relationships. Your spouse is to be number one, okay? That's what that looks like. All right. The greatest cause of divorce. Greatest cause of divorce. Any takers? Anybody want to guess? Money. Lack of communication. Lack of love. Growing apart. Infidelity, unfaithfulness. Marrying too young, domestic violence, financial problems, lack of family support, religious differences, lack of intimacy. Anybody want to take a shot at the number one cause of divorce? It's in that list. Infidelity. Any other takers? Lack of family support. 43% of divorce marriages split for this reason, according to a Forbes magazine study. All right. Lack of family support. Number one cause for divorce. All right. What does that mean? What does that mean? All right. So, what is the role of the family, specifically, namely the in laws, in a marriage? All right. According to research studies, there's a strong correlation between the involvement of in laws and the likelihood of divorce. A study conducted by researchers at Illinois State University found that 60%, on this study, 60% of marriages end up in divorce due to interference from the in laws. All right. That's pretty alarming, right? This is the number one cause of divorce in America today. All right, this is an alarming statistic. Let's go on a little bit further. Highlights the negative impacts that in-laws can have on a marriage. There are several reasons why conflicts with in-laws can lead to divorce. One of the most common reasons is when an individual feels like they have to choose between their spouse and their family. It's a difficult situation that can cause immense stress and strain on the relationship. Additionally, lack of communication and understanding between all parties involved can create resentment and bitterness. Now, I just copied this from that particular study, but the reason I wanted this in here is I wanted you to see this statement right here. It's a difficult situation. What? When individuals feel they have to, what? Choose between their spouse and their family. In other words, that if we're not careful as outsiders of a marriage, we can put somebody in a position to choose their spouse or to choose us. We should be very careful never to put them in that position, all right? Especially as in-laws, because that's the greatest area that this takes place, all right? I know some of y'all have have children, probably a lot of y'all have already dealt with some of this. I'm going to have to deal with it, but I ain't got to that place yet. All right. So look at Genesis chapter 2. Let's get to the Bible. Genesis chapter 2, to leave, verse 24. Verse 24. Therefore shall a man, what? Leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Jesus quoted this in Matthew chapter 19. I'm going to mention that here in a moment. Paul quoted the same thing. And you'll notice that at times what's interesting about that is that the Bible, oftentimes when Paul would quote scriptures, he wouldn't reword them, but he would quote them in such a way that you could see he was kind of giving his own idea in them. And this is not necessarily just quoting them. He's saying that this is what that says, and kind of explaining the interpretation of the old scriptures as he writes. He never rewrites this one. Jesus never added anything to it. In other words, that it meant exactly what it said. It meant exactly what it said, that a son is to leave his father and mother and to cleave unto his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. All right. Hebrew, in Genesis chapter 2, the word leave is this word right here. All right. Anybody want to take a shot at pronouncing it? I think we get the point. This is the definition. All right. To loosen, relinquish, permit, etc., commit, self, fail, forsake, fortify, help, leave. All right? That's the definition of it. Jesus says it again in Matthew chapter 19. Now, the reason I went to this one is because the Old Testament is in Hebrew, the New Testament is in Greek. So I wanted to see what the Greek word is that Jesus uses for this definition or for this statement. And he used this particular word, which means to leave behind, by implication, what? To abandon, have remained, forsake, leave, reserve. Does that mean that a son is to walk away from his family and never see them again? Is that what the Bible's saying? No, we know that. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible is not telling us that a son is supposed to leave and never talk to his parent again. What he's saying is that when the son leaves that home and he begins a new family, there's some dynamics change between him and the Lord. He's no longer a child at home. He's no longer under the authority of his parents. He's to stand alone. He's a grown man. He's to stand alone. He's to leave based on a few different principles. He's to leave, and I'm going to get to some of these other things in a moment, but he's to leave, number one, he's to leave their authority. I'm going to get to a few more things here in a moment. Jesus will use the word leave. All right, so let's go to a little bit further. All right, I want you to turn to this one, Luke 14:33. Luke 14:33. That a man is to leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. This, as we've talked about, you're turning to Luke 14:33. This is the process of life. For years, what has happened, Adam and Eve had children. We know some of them. They had children. These children got married. And what did they do? They had children too, right? They got married. They had children too. They got married. And so the process goes. So what is happening is this the process of life. All right. They are these children. We are to start on families, and one family after another family after another family. We're to carry on the generation of the work of the Lord through the generations. We're to train our children through the generations to serve the Lord. And the legacy and the essence of God is to be seen through our marriages. Y'all remember that? The essence of God we talked about last time, the essence of marriage, and back that up. The essence of marriage. What is the essence of marriage? What's the marriage's main purpose? What is it to show? It is to show forth the relationship of what? Christ and the church, right? So our marriages should mirror or attempt to mirror the relationship between Christ and the church. All right? Why is it important? Because Jesus uses this word, Luke 14, verse 33. He says, so likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. All right? So what's Jesus saying? What Jesus is saying is the same thing. Leave. To come to Christ, you have to leave everything behind, right? To be a disciple of Jesus Christ. I'm not talking about to get saved. To get saved, you trust the Lord Jesus Christ with your eternal destiny, your soul. To follow Jesus Christ, you trust your life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And in order to trust your life to the Lord Jesus Christ, you have to leave everything behind. The same instance, if you back up, verse 26, Jesus, this is a summation. Verse 33 that we just read is a summation of what he starts in verse 26. And he says this, if any man come to me and hate not his father, his mother, his wife, his children, his brethren, his sisters, yea, and his own life, he cannot be my disciple. That's what the word forsake means. That's what the word forsake means. That's what the word leave means. So Jesus is asking the spouse, the husband and wife, to leave everything for each other, just as he's asking his disciples to do for himself. The relationship of Christ and the church, the relationship between a husband and a wife. Do we see the imagery here? Do we see how the marriage, the essence of marriage is mirrored in the relationship of Christ and the church? It's supposed to be seen in us. All right? So, again, the word forsake there means literally to say adieu, figuratively to renounce, to bid farewell, to forsake, to take leave, send away. All right, same thing. Christ is asking us to leave. All right, so that's biblically. Okay, so vows. Y'all remember when I said I do, right? If you're married, you said I do, right? What did you say I do to? Well, that's the vow that you said. Okay, that's taken straight out of the book. All right, the groom's name. I highlighted that because I literally copied it and pasted it from my marriage notes. Right, literally, this is exactly what I say when I marry somebody. Groom's name. Will you have this woman to be your wife, to live together in the covenant of marriage? Will you love her in sickness and in health? There it is. Forsaking all others. This is not just intimately. This means exactly what it says. To forsake all others. Be faithful to her as long as you both shall live. Now, if you're married, you said I do to that. That's like, coming back to the bank contract and be like, well, what did I sign? That. That's what you did right there. You agreed not to your wife or your husband. You agreed to God that you would do this, right? That you would forsake all others. All right, let's continue on. The essence of marriage, again, is to reflect the relationship between Christ and the church. So as Christ and the church react with one another, the relationship that is expected there, same is expected to us. So this is the relationship between Christ and the church. This is what it expects. I want you to follow along, and then I'm going to explain it maybe a little bit here in just a moment. All right. So 2 Corinthians 11, verses 2 and 3 make this statement concerning Christ and the church. Paul says, I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. Do we get what he's saying? What he's saying right there is, I presented you to Christ as chaste, but the devil is doing his best to get you to focus on something else. To not leave the world. That there's something that is in competition. The devil is doing his best to put something in competition with Jesus. All right. Romans chapter 12. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. What's the similarity between this verse in this verse in relation to what I'm talking about. They're both telling you to forsake everything for Christ, right? That we are to have the simplicity. By the way, the word simplicity just means singleness. He's the only one. He is to be the apple of your eye. He's to be the only one, right? The only one that you're serving, right? The relationship between these is they're both telling you to forsake everything for Jesus, right? Matthew 6:24. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one, love the other, or else he'll hold to the one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. What's he saying? You can't have two. You can't have two things that you're trying to have a proper relationship with simultaneously. There's going to inevitably be competition, between the two, and it's going to cause issues, right? One, that's exactly what he says right there. Else you'll hold the one, despise the other. You cannot have two. That's not you should not, you cannot. You ever wondered how in the world Jacob made it with Leah and Rachel? I mean, you can see the dysfunction right there already. He's got two people that he's trying to serve. Rachel's his favorite. She can't have children. There's issues. Leah's able to have children, and there's issues because there's already fighting between them. They're in competition for his affection. I mean, it's nothing but a recipe for disaster. And that's what, if we're not careful, we can allow happen in our marriage. All right, so let me explain this. This is just somewhat of a family tree. We have a father and mother, and they have a child, and these children get married. This is the grandparents, whatever. This is kind of just showing the family tree. And these two get married, and then they have children, right? Everybody get this picture? All right. Which of these relationships, what is the greatest potential for relationship competition? For the husband, that's the greatest potential. Let me tell you why. Now, that's not to say that a mother and a wife cannot end up causing relationship competition with a husband. I'll explain that in a moment. So let's look at something for a moment. So the Bible tells us specifically, and I believe the Bible does this for a reason, that a man is to leave his father and mother and is to cleave to his wife. God puts it within a man to do that. Boys are built to leave. That's what they're made to do, to leave. Typically, this is true in society, typically the girls stay a little bit closer to home. So the parents of the wife are not so clingy to a degree. Occasionally they are. It depends on the circumstance. So what happens is the mother of the groom ends up realizing that she's about to lose her son, or that she's lost her son because they've got married. And so she ends up doing everything that she can to try to keep him close. Maybe, let me help you. Let me do your laundry. Let me do this kind of thing. And it's, this is great. I've got a wife. I've got a woman I can be close to. I can be a woman I can be intimate with. And I've got a mother that takes care of everything. Little does he know that his mother trying to hone in and keep him close is actually causing competition with the wife. And now these two are in competition with each other for his affection. And she's making the wife feel extremely inferior because he can't tell her no. We see the issue? And now we've got a situation right here that's causing competition, and it's already affecting their marriage. That's probably year number one. And it's going to get better, or he's going to finally tell mama, you've got to back up. You've got to back up. All right? I'm going to explain some other ways that this can cause issues. I heard a story about, a man, he was counseling a husband and wife, and she was talking, and she was just, over and over against him, and blah, 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 blah. You never do this, you never do that. He never does anything around the house. He don't ever talk to me. We don't have any kind of intimate conversation. He never does this, he never does that. And all of a sudden he makes one statement. And he's like, well, if you'd ever get off the phone with your mama, Well, there's the issue right there. Just presented itself. Wife stays on the phone with her mother all the time, and she prioritized her time with her mother more than her time with her husband, and he feels like he's in competition with her, right? And so that's caused issues now in their relationship. So inevitably, wife will then begin to despise mother because she's in competition for his affection, the man that she married. Now you have family issues, right? This is the way it goes. What do we need to do? I had a lady ask me. She said, what is some advice? I want one piece of advice that you can give me as the mother-in-law of the groom. What's one piece of advice that you can give me?" I said, "Back up and let them be married. Back up. Let them be a couple on their own. They have started a new family." All right, next. This one right here. All right. So, okay, a wife has a lot of responsibility. That's very clear, right? Especially a wife who is in the job or in a working mom, and everybody's got to make those decisions. That's between you and the Lord of how you're following the Lord and what you're supposed to do. But a woman who works has even more responsibility because now she's working and she's trying to keep the house. How many times is it that a woman has kept the children, 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 and the husband wants to be intimate with the wife, and she says, "I'm just whooped. I've been with the kids all day. I've done the kids, all the kids, and I'm just tired. I don't have any time because I'm constantly trying to help the kids, help the kids, help the kids." You see what's happening here? Now she's prioritizing the children over her husband, and the very individuals that she wants him to love the most is the one he's in competition for her affection over. And so the ones that she wants him to love, he has begun to resent to a degree because they're taking away his relationship with his wife. Do we see how these issues can become a big deal? And this is never discussed, it's never talked about. The Bible says that we are to leave. And that means that nobody is to be prioritized over this relationship. Your children are important, women. Men too. Your children are important. But you're not in a covenant with your children. And one day, your children will be gone. All right? Your wife will not. Your husband will not. Dating. All right? Important dating clue here. Kind of look at this. Kind of look at this. If you've got a husband, or you're dating a guy, let me say it that way, you're dating a guy, and he's getting real close with his mama, you make sure, as you're talking about marriage, that he's going to be willing to walk away from that relationship. And that you're going to become the priority in his life. Okay? So it's important to discuss these things. This is just the greatest, just kind of something to help us see how these issues can come out. There's the example. All right. So the point that you want to see, all right, so let's kind of finish this statement, that a man's to leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, and they two shall be what? One what? One flesh. What does that mean? Anybody define that for me? Really kind of hard to wrap your mind around, isn't it? Because I don't think we're intended to understand it completely. In other words, that this is a miracle of God. In fact, Jesus brings this back up. We talked about it last time, that what God hath joined together, let no man put aside. You can't take it apart because God has married it, or joined it together. The point is that when God marries a husband and wife, this is the creation by God of a new family. Right? Can we agree on that? God has miraculously, on the wedding day, created a brand new family. All right, so let me show you what the world does. Let me show you what the world does. Y'all ever seen this sign before? Today, two families become one. We ask you, please pick a seat and not a side. Basically, they just picked a cute way of saying sit where you want to, right? But they did that by lying to you and tell you that two families become one. No, they don't. God created a brand new one. That's biblical, right? God created a new family. Two families didn't become one. One family lost a son, one family lost a daughter, and God created a new family. They say, well, that's a crazy way of looking at it. No, that's a biblical way of looking at it. That's not the way the world chooses to look at it, though. Right? The world chooses to look at it differently. Maybe this one, okay? I'll let y'all read it. All right. The daughter says, you're not losing a daughter, Dad. You're gaining a son. But he says, you're still moving out, right? Okay? As long as you're still moving out. But this is what we tell ourselves, right? To make us feel better about our children leaving. Because I haven't got there yet. A lot of you have already beaten me there, but I'm sure that is a difficult bridge to cross. I know it is. It has to be. I ain't gotten there yet. And I've already told you, I'm not preaching here what I've already got set in my mind, and I tell you that I make an A on this, and I got it all figured out. I'm telling you that this is the biblical standard. This is what God has set it out to be. And that this is not true. You're not, a mom and dad is not gaining a son. What kind of dysfunctional family has kids in the house that are married? That's not true. It's not even the process of life. No, the daughter leaves and the son leaves his family and they begin a new family together. All right. Same situation on the other side. All right. You're gaining a daughter. You're not losing a son, you're gaining a daughter. Same situation. But we get told all this. We're like, yeah, that sounds good. That's warm. It feels good because I don't want to lose my son. But you've got to lose your son because that's the process of life. All right. Just as Christ shouldn't have to compete for the heart of his church, is the same way that a wife or a husband shouldn't have to compete for the affection and the attention of their spouse. That is the whole biblical principle right there. Christ should not have to compete with the world. He should not have to compete with sports. He should not have to compete with college. He should not have to compete with things for the hearts of his people. He's jealous over us with a godly jealousy. We should not have to compete for the affections of our spouse. Right? That's what the Bible is saying. We are to prioritize one another. All right. So again, leaving. How do we leave? How do we leave? In what ways are we supposed to leave? I've preached a few of these. If maybe in a message along the way, hadn't been recently, but along the way, if you followed some, you've heard me preach, probably preach some of it here. But financially, we are to leave financially. We'll leave home financially. That means at a point, parents, you may have to have the hard conversation with your children and say, no, you left. And you need to learn to make it. Now, I'm not telling you there's not situations where they're put in a position and they have no choice and you'd be there to help them and, extenuating circumstances. Absolutely. Those things can happen. Accidents can happen. Disasters can happen. All of those things can happen. But if they're constantly coming to you and you're fueling their bad behavior, no, they need to leave you financially so that they can start their own family. By the way, this also means that a husband and a wife are to not have separate bank accounts. They need to be united financially. That only breeds disaster. That only gives an advantage and a place to the devil to get in when you've got your money and you got his money and her money and our money and their money. Every bit, it's all the same. It's all ours. So what does it matter? Put it all together and do it together. I promise you, it'll save you a lot of headache and you'll be united on it. Next, emotionally, you are to leave mom and dad, leave your family emotionally. What else? Religiously. Right? All right? Mom and daddy might be able to tell you what to do when you're in their house and how to serve the Lord. But one of the things that we like to do is we like to maintain control in our families. And what we'll do if we're not careful is we'll tell our children, this is what I think the Lord has for you to do, when what we should be doing is training them to hear from the Lord for themselves. So that when they get to this place and they're leaving, they know how to hear from the Lord themselves. And that we're not hearing from the Lord for them and telling them what they're supposed to be doing. A lot of times if that's what we're doing, we're really just manipulating them into staying and doing what we want them to do. They need to be trained religiously on how to follow the Lord for themselves. Why? Because God may lead them to do something you don't want them to do. God may lead them to move or go to a different church, or God may lead them to go somewhere, whatever the case may be, that they can be united and serve the Lord there. I don't know. But the Lord may lead them to do something. And whatever the Lord leads them to do, they need the freedom to look to the Lord and hear from the Lord themselves so that they can follow the Lord and what He would have them to do. What else? In authority. When the children, I know it's a biblical command, it is one of the 10 commandments that you are to honor your father and mother. But that does not mean when you're out of their house that you are to obey your father and mother. The Bible says children obey your father and mother. It never says adults obey your father and mother. Never. We are to leave their authority. No longer am I under the authority of my parents. I'm under a greater authority. I'm under the authority of God. All right? That's the thing. All right, so let's talk about something else. Family dysfunction, right? That's because we put the fun in dysfunction, right? All right. What is this? Have any of us, maybe none of us, no, let me just say, none of us have ever experienced a perfect biblical family, right? Anybody ever experienced that? Has anybody ever been a part of a perfect biblical family? It's impossible. So what does that mean? That means to some degree or another, you were involved in a family that had dysfunction. Because you were part of a family that was never the complete standard, if your family was put under the magnifying glass, whether you're talking about you and your husband and your children, or whether you're talking about you and your mom and daddy and your siblings and the family you grew up in, whatever the case is, if you put that family under the microscope, there's going to be some dysfunction there because there is no perfect family, right? Family dysfunction can cause a number of issues because of priority. All right? This dysfunction intensifies with each particular generation as we go down. Again, this study is the standard. And so what we're to do is compare our marriage to the standard of what God says a marriage is to be, and to family to the standard, and to remove from our family as much as dysfunction as possible. All right? We're to remove dysfunction from our families by adjusting our families to the biblical standard. Let me give you some examples of biblical dysfunction in family. All right. So, some of the greatest potential for encountering family dysfunction. Well, that's timely, isn't it? The holidays. Right? The holidays. Extended family tend to put pressure on the new family to adjust their holiday schedule for this, all right, for the extended family. In other words, well, it's my Christmas. You're to come to my house for Christmas, whatever the case is. The extended family tends to put pressure on the new family to adjust their holiday schedule based on what's best for these. All right. Also, what's crazy is the most dysfunctional member of the family, the big family, the extended family, the most dysfunctional member of the extended family gets to set the rules for the family gatherings. Have y'all ever noticed that before? That either you've got the crazy grandpa that's a loose cannon and his grenade and the pin's been pulled and you're walking around on eggshells because you don't know when he's going to go off. And so he gets to set the rules, right? Because everybody's got to walk around on eggshells. Can't do this. Got to be careful about how we do. Or grandpa's going to blow up. We got to be careful about this. Grandparents, and then all of a sudden, this has become a big thing lately. Grandparents have suddenly become a part of the immediate family. I saw a thing on Facebook the other day, and I was reluctant to say it, but I saw a thing on Facebook that I don't remember who shared it, but somebody shared it, and it was basically stating that a woman, she had lost her husband, she was a widow, and that she was waiting on her children to invite her over for Christmas, and what she expected was her children to invite them over Christmas morning so that she could be there and present when the children got to open gifts, right? Is that a big ask? It depends on who you ask. Because some people really want that for their husband and the wife and the kids. Right? That's understandable because they're a family. They're a family. And so if they say there's times that we want to be a family, we're going to understand that because they're a family. And so when we step back and we say, no, you're supposed to include me in that, now what we've done is we've put them in a position where we're asking you to prioritize me into the immediate family. No, no, that's unacceptable. No, you're not a part. I left you. Okay, I'm going to say more about that in a moment because I kind of understand the situation a little bit, but I'll say more in a moment. By the way, doesn't every family have a passive aggressive mother-in-law who holds the backbone of all the men in the family and she gets to tell everybody what to do? Isn't that the case? Doesn't everybody have one of those? Right? She sets the rules. And so what happens is she gets to tell everybody, well, I'm glad you finally showed up. So, well, I see y'all kind of got here a little bit late. Everything okay? You know what she's doing. You know what she's doing. And the issue is nobody will stand up and say, look, you're not doing this in my family. And if you continue to act this way, then I'm not coming at all. Because I'm not putting my family and I'm not allowing this dysfunction to affect my family. And these are hard things that have to be dealt with. But what typically happens is we're unwilling to stand up and we trade peace, a moment of peace, for a lot of dysfunction that affects our whole family because we're not willing to stand for the things that we need to stand for. Honor does not mean obey. All right? So let's move on. I'm going to hit some, again, I'm going to come back to some of those things because I don't want you to understand this, I'm not being insensitive to the needs of other people. I understand that other people, and I'm going to get to some of that and the sensitivity in a moment. All right, the consequences of ignoring this biblical law. This will cause our spouses to feel in competition for our affection. Okay? It is unfair of me to make my wife feel like she has to compete with my mother for my affection. It's unfair that my wife would feel like she has to compete with my mother to try to gain and be my helper, right? Because as the head of the house, I'm just putting it where I'm at, but as the head of the house, I'm to make the decisions of the house. She's to be my helper. And a good head always looks to his helper when he's making a decision, right? It's like a man who runs a Fortune 500 company and then bringing in bad news. And he's like, stop bringing me bad news, right? No, you need to know that bad news. And so we need to reach out to that helper in every situation because she's wired by God to see things that I'm not able to see. And so she comes to me and says, look, these are some things you might consider. And I'm like, well, okay, I've already talked to Mama and we've already decided what we're going to do. Well, that's not right. Who's to be my helper? And so now I've put her in direct competition with my mother for the role, her biblical role. She used to be the helper, right? So it can cause our spouse to feel competition for our affection, and that's not right. All right, it can lead to a singles feeling married. Right? If you're not in one, you've probably witnessed one. A singles feeling marriage is when two people are married, but they're single. Does that make any sense? They live separate lives. They do their own thing. They got their own bank accounts. They live their own lives, but they're just married, right? Okay. There's degrees of the singles feeling marriage too. All right. We bring other dysfunction. We allow that dysfunction into our own home. All right. What it does is it erodes the very fabric of the relationship by undermining the roles of the spouse. All right? So maybe you've seen some of this stuff before. You can't do anything like my father. You've ever heard that statement? You can't fix the car. You can't do this. You can't do anything like my father. What does that do? That destroys the confidence of your husband, and it creates competition between your husband and your father. And now what you've actually done is not only created competition, you just told him he wasn't as good as your father. So how do you think that makes him feel? Not prioritized? And that you love your father more than you love him, and you're in competition. And now he's despising your father, and he's in your relationship struggling. It's causing all kind of issues. Or maybe this one: I wish you could learn to cook like my mother. Okay, Well, she can't. So learn to cook yourself, or try to figure something out. But don't be degrading to her and put her in competition with your mother. Okay? How should the towels be folded? Have y'all ever seen that one? Or even looked at that one before, right? Folding towels ain't a big issue, right?
Or why should it be folded?
Why should towels be folded? That one too. But every house folds towels a little bit different, like washcloths. Okay, so there's the washcloth, and you may even call them this. Some people call them bath cloths, the bath cloths, washcloths, whatever they are. You fold them one time, or do you fold them there and you fold them over again? What's the right way? And so we can get in a fight over how washcloths can be. By the way, you young folks, if you don't think you can get in a fight about how washcloths are be folded, then get married. You can get in a fight about how washcloths are to be folded. It's possible. But the issue is not how washcloths are to be folded. The issue is that I'm prioritizing the dysfunction of my family into our family. And I'm saying that the family that I grew up in is the standard and everything has to be done. And so what I'm trying to do is recreate my family that I grew up in this family now, and I'm saying that you have to do everything like my family did it that I grew up in, or it's not right. That happens in every house, right? That's why the first year of marriage is so extremely difficult, because they're trying to figure this thing out, and they're both coming from dysfunctional homes, and they're trying to figure out all this dysfunction that's now in their house. And they're trying to decide, are you going to prioritize me here? Are you going to let me fold the clothes how I want to fold them? And so maybe we need to sit down and have, what do you think? Let's have a rational conversation about how they're supposed to be folded, right? It's not that big a deal. What I'm saying is that's a symptom of a bigger issue. And that we're bringing in family dysfunction because we're not prioritizing our spouse. All right. Parents, just a word. If you're a parent, just a word on some things that you can do if your children are married to kind of help them and benefit them in your relationship between the two of you. All right. Back up and allow your children to be married. Okay? Important one. Back up. Let them be married. They're going to have issues. They're going to have problems. Pray for them. Let them figure it out themselves. When you go in and try to solve all the problems for them, you're not helping them, you're actually hurting them. Let them learn these things themselves, all right? I trust you've had 18 years, maybe more, to help them. Back up and let the Lord help them, all right? Your responsibility here, as far as training the children, it's over. It's complete. That's not a bad thing. You've done your job. You've done that, okay? What does that mean? That means you can step back from the parental role. Have y'all ever felt a desire as a parent, if you're a parent, you ever felt a desire that you wanted to be friends with your kids? Y'all ever felt that before? I would like to be friends with my kids. I want to have my children. I'd like to just be friends with my children, but right now my children don't need friends. They need parents. Right here, that's friend time. Now it's time to be friends. They don't need parents anymore. The parent time's over with. The responsibility is complete. The danger here is finding your fulfillment and identity in parenting. And what happens is when you find your fulfillment identity in parenting and your children leave, then you feel like you have nothing left to live for. Because everything that you've set up and everything that you've done and everything that you find fulfillment in and everything that you put your identity in is gone. And it's over with. Where are we to find our identity? You found it when you got baptized, right? We identified with who? So what we're to do is, rather than allow parenting to be a responsibility of serving Christ. And so when you get done with that role of parenting, it's not that you have nothing left to do, it's that you've got a new role to do. So when you get done parenting, start finding your new role. Already start praying. If you haven't done that, start looking for that. What's the new role that Christ would have you do now that you're The reason is that you and your wife, now that your children's gone, life's not over with. Man, you still got a lot of work to do, right? Who were some of the greatest church workers, two of the greatest husband and wife, greatest church workers in the book of Acts? Anybody can call their name? Priscilla and Aquila. What were their kids' names? Anybody remember their kids' names? Never says a word about their kids. Why? Because they probably the case their kids were gone, or either they didn't have any. I don't know. Maybe they had a house full. The Bible's just absent in that. But what they were doing was serving Christ together. And so that the greatest thing that you can do after you've raised your children is continue to serve the Lord together. Let that be your identity. But so often we find our identity in being something that we're not or shouldn't find identity in, that when we fulfill that position, we don't know how to move on. We need to find our identity in serving Christ. All right? Raise children is important. I'm not saying that it's not. But once we get through with it, we've got to be able to move on to the next thing. All right? Raise your children. By the way, this is a good one. Parents, if you still have children, if you're still raising children, raise your children to get married. This is the goal. This is the goal. All right. This is what they're trying to obtain. This is the standard. This is what God set forth. God looked at man after all his creation. God looked at man and he said, "Boy, it's not good that man would be alone. I'll make him help meet for him." Right? So that's the goal, is to get married. So if we're not careful, we raise our children. We raise our children to get a good education. We raise them. We make sure. Look, you don't need to have children now. Till y'all ready, you be careful now. You don't need to even think about getting married till you're 25, 30 years old. You don't even need to be thinking about children till you're 30, 35. Right? That's about the way of the world. At what age is a woman prepared to have children? Now you ask yourself the question of why God put it that way. What we've done is we've created a scenario where, now I don't know what I would do, but I think if I were in the situation where I were trying to sell pharmaceutical drugs or something of the nature, and I were maybe in the field of infertility, I would like to see a scenario where we tried our best to have people wait to get married, and we put off marriage, and we had them focus on college for a long period of time, and then finally, when they were able to get married, maybe at 30 years old, they wanted to spend some time on themselves, so that when they were finally prepared to have children, they were 35 years old. Their body was through with the whole idea of having children. They were almost to the place where if at 35 years old they could have children, it would be called a geriatric pregnancy because it's past the time, and they're infertile at this point because their body's past childbearing years, and so they have to spend a fortune if they can have 1 to 2 children trying to conceive, right? Because they've used up all the time that God gave them to get married and have children. What I'm saying is not that those other things are not important, but maybe we have our priorities mixed up. Maybe this is the goal of life, and maybe God has given us marriage to enjoy life. And that it is through a biblical marriage that we have the enjoyment of life, not through money. But see, everybody's prone to get married, but we know it's a headache, but we know we got to do it, right? That's the way the world looks at it. And so we're going to put it off as long as we can. We're going to have our fun. And then finally, after we get through with our fun, we'll get down there, get married, and maybe talk about having some kids, right? There's no greater joy I have in life than the children that God's given me and the wife that I get to share that life with. If you took everything away from me right now, the last things that the thing I'd beg you most for is my wife, my children. There's the greatest, most wonderful things in life. Why? And so this is what we're steering our children away from if we're not careful. This is what society is steering our children away from. Raise your children to get married. Help them to look to get married and have a proper. Okay, this is it. Parents, do not manipulate or use your children's love and compassion for you against them. The situation I was talking about earlier is this lady. She was a widow, and what she was saying, it was well, I'm lonely, and I don't have anything. It's this, and my Christmas mornings are. I understand. I understand that. I understand that. But what you're asking me to do is because of my love for you, you're asking me to cause dysfunction in my own family so that you can get past this situation that you're in. And what's happening is that you're actually manipulating your children through their love and compassion for you to do something that's unbiblical. Don't do that. All right? So what do we do? What do we do? How do we prioritize one another? That's what you do. Prioritize one another. Let me ask you this. Do this. Do this. Look for areas. Look for areas where this rule has been breached in your marriage. Look for this in your marriage. Where is it that you have not prioritized your wife? Maybe it's work. Maybe it's work that your wife is competing with, or maybe it's work that your husband's competing with. Maybe it's the house or the farm, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's your children. Maybe it's another relationship. Maybe it's his phone. What is it that he's prioritizing over you? All right. What is it that has caused a breach in this particular area in your marriage? Here's the important one: sit down. All right. Let me give you a little tip. When you discuss things, all right, if I want my wife to be able to sit down and have a conversation with me. And if there's an area where I'm not prioritizing her, I want her to be able to come to me and say, look, this is an area where I don't feel like you're prioritizing me in the relationship, because I want to be able to do that to her too, right? This is an area where I don't feel prioritized, and let's talk about it. Is there a way we can do something? Is there a way we can change it? How can we adjust this? But let me tell you, we're not to do this. Don't wait till you get in the middle of a fight and then they're like, well, you don't prioritize me. No, that's not the way to go about it. Sit down in a non-war time, in a peace time, and have a conversation, right? And say, let's talk about this rule of priority. And what I'll typically do is I won't wait for Crystal to come to me. I'll do my best to go to her and say, is there any ways that lately that you feel like I haven't been prioritizing you? And if she actually, maybe it's this way or this way, so this has kind of become, maybe your mind's been on church, your mind's been on these other things more. Okay, what can we do to adjust this? How can I make you my priority? How can I adjust our lives to where you're being prioritized? Right? Sit down, have a conversation, stand up. Men, please stand up. Stand up to your wives. Stand up for your wives. Stand up for your wives to your families. Stand up for your wives for things that would get in the way. Men, stand up for your wives. If you want to have a better marriage, it starts with men standing up. Prioritize her. All right. Stand up to your wives. If they are doing this, if they're not prioritizing you, or if they're putting the kids ahead of you, or they're putting their mother ahead of you, or whatever the case is, if you're not the priority, stand up to your wife. All right. Don't allow it, because it's going to bring more dysfunction in your marriage and your life. Yes, do what? Yes, yes. If your wife is a mother-in-law and you see her infiltrating into the children's marriage, if you see that being the issue, stand up. Don't allow that to take place, because she can unknowingly and inadvertently. And look, this is not a situation where most people are going in and they're I'm going to get in here and tear this business up. No, it's what it is it's a situation where we're really trying to do the best thing for our children. And what we'll do is, if we're not careful, is we'll so try to help that we end up hurting and we end up causing damage in the marriage. And so if you see either of you are doing that, stand up to the other one and help them see it. Because a lot of times we don't see what we're doing. And that's what I tell Crystal: stand up. Tell me if I'm doing, if you see me doing something like that. Or if I'm, as a father, not doing what I'm should, and I try to make sure, as my daughters, make sure I give them the attention that's one particular area, trying to give them the attention that they need as their father. And I say, if you ever see that, or you ever see a situation where I've missed it and I need to step in there, let me know. Okay. The rule of rank, all right? Because God is your only master, because God is your head, make your spouse your priority. This is not dishonoring to God. This was designed by God to display the essence of marriage. God first, spouse second. All right. Any questions? Any questions? All right.